The sun hung low over the city of Tokyo, casting long shadows across the bustling streets. The air was thick with the scent of street food and the hum of chatter, but beneath the surface of this vibrant metropolis lurked a darker undercurrent. Cursed energy, invisible to the untrained eye, pulsed through the alleys and rooftops, a constant reminder of the world's hidden dangers. This was a world where curses, manifestations of humanity's darkest emotions, roamed freely, and only a select few could combat them. Among these few was Yuji Itadori, a young man with a heart as strong as his fists and a cursed energy that set him apart from the rest. Yuji stood at the edge of a carnival that had mysteriously appeared overnight on the outskirts of the city. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, its lights flickering erratically, and the faint sound of distorted carnival music echoed through the air. The place should have been teeming with life, but instead, it was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of rusted metal. Yuji adjusted the straps of his black uniform, his sharp eyes scanning the area. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood Megumi Fushiguro, his stoic and calculating classmate, and Nobara Kujisaki, whose fiery demeanor was matched only by her precision with a hammer and nails. The trio had been sent to investigate the sudden surge of cursed energy emanating from the carnival, and though they were seasoned fighters, something about this mission felt different, ominous. "This place reeks of cursed energy," Megumi muttered, his hands already forming the shadowy outlines of his shikigami. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "It's like the entire carnival is alive." "Alive or not, we're taking it down," Nobara said, twirling her hammer in one hand and clutching a handful of nails in the other. Her confidence was unwavering, but Yuji noticed the way her grip tightened on her weapon. She felt it too, the oppressive weight of the cursed energy pressing down on them. Yuji cracked his knuckles, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's not keep it waiting, then." His voice was light, but his mind was already racing. He could feel the cursed energy swirling around him, a chaotic storm that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. It was stronger than anything he'd encountered before, and yet, he felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if the energy recognized him. He shook the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. Whatever was waiting for them inside the carnival, they would face it together. The trio stepped through the carnival gates, and the atmosphere shifted immediately. The air grew colder, and the music grew louder, a dissonant melody that seemed to claw at their minds. The ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as if it might give way at any moment. Yuji's senses were on high alert, his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash his immense strength at a moment's notice. He had always been a natural fighter, his physical prowess honed through years of martial arts training, but it was his cursed energy that truly set him apart. Unlike most sorcerers, Yuji's energy was raw and untamed, a force of nature that he channeled through his fists with devastating effect. They didn't have to wait long for the first attack. A grotesque figure emerged from the shadows, its body a twisted amalgamation of carnival attractions, a carousel horse's head, a clown's flailing arms, and a Ferris wheel spinning gears for a torso. It let out a guttural roar, charging at them with terrifying speed. Yuji was the first to react, his body moving almost instinctively. He darted forward, his fists glowing with cursed energy as he delivered a powerful punch to the creature's chest. The impact sent shockwaves through the air, and the creature staggered back, but it wasn't enough to take it down. Megumi seized the opportunity, his hands moving in a fluid motion as he summoned his divine dog Shikigami. The shadowy beast lunged at the creature, its teeth sinking into the cursed flesh with a sickening crunch. Nobara was already in motion, her hammer striking a nail into the creature's side. The nail exploded with cursed energy, tearing through the creature's body and causing it to let out a final, ear-piercing shriek before collapsing into a heap of twisted metal and flesh. "That was too easy," Nobara said, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the remains. "Something's not right." Yuji nodded, his grin fading. He could feel it too, the cursed energy hadn't dissipated. If anything, it had grown stronger, more concentrated. The carnival around them seemed to shift, the rides and attractions twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. The ground beneath their feet began to crack, and from the fissures emerged more cursed spirits, each more horrifying than the last. "We're surrounded," Megumi said, his voice tight with tension. His shikigami circled around him, ready to strike at his command. "This isn't just a cursed spirit, it's a domain." Yuji's eyes widened. A domain expansion was the pinnacle of curse technique, a space where the user's power was absolute. If they were trapped inside one, the odds were stacked against them. But Yuji wasn't one to back down from a challenge. He clenched his fists, his cursed energy flaring to life around him like a blazing aura. "Then we'll just have to break out of it." The battle that followed was a whirlwind of chaos and destruction. Yuji moved like a force of nature, his fists striking with the force of a wrecking ball, each blow sending shockwaves through the cursed domain. Megumi's Shikigami darted through the fray, their movements precise and deadly, while Nobra's nails exploded with pinpoint accuracy, tearing through the cursed spirits with ruthless efficiency. But no matter how many they defeated, more seemed to take their place, the cursed energy growing stronger with each passing moment. As the fight raged on, Yuji couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced around, his eyes narrowing as he caught a glimpse of a figure standing atop the Ferris wheel. It was too far away to make out any details, but the aura emanating from it was unlike anything he'd ever felt, a paradoxical blend of power and emptiness that sent a chill down his spine. Whoever, or whatever, it was the source of the cursed domain. And it was toying with them. "We need to end this, now," Yuji shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He could feel his cursed energy reaching its limit, but he pushed himself harder, his fists glowing brighter with each strike. Megumi and Nobra nodded, their movements becoming more desperate as they fought to keep up with the relentless onslaught. Just as it seemed they might be overwhelmed, the cursed domain began to fracture. The twisted carnival around them started to dissolve, the cursed energy unraveling like a thread. The figure on the Ferris wheel vanished, leaving behind only a faint, mocking laughter that echoed in the silence. The trio stood amidst the ruins of the carnival, their bodies battered and bruised but still standing. Yuji clenched his fists, his mind racing with questions. Who, or what, had created that domain? And why had it targeted them? He didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear, this was only the beginning. A larger threat loomed on the horizon, and they would need to be ready for whatever came next. The air was thick with the acrid stench of cursed energy, the carnival grounds now a twisted labyrinth of flickering lights and grotesque attractions. Yuji Itadori stood at the center of it all, his fists clenched and his breath steady, though his heart raced with the weight of the paradoxes closing in around him. The cursed spirits had multiplied since Part 1, their forms more grotesque and their laughter more unnerving. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, its gondolas swaying unnaturally as if alive, while the carousel spun at a breakneck speed, its horses' eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Yuji's companions, Megumi Fushiguro and Nobra Kujisaki, were nearby, their expressions a mix of determination and unease. The stakes had risen, and the carnival was no longer just a battleground, it was a trap designed to unravel them. The first sign of escalation came when the ground beneath them began to shift, the dirt and gravel rising to form grotesque humanoid figures. These cursed constructs moved with eerie precision, their hollow eyes fixed on the trio. "They're adapting," Megumi muttered, his voice tight with frustration. "The more we fight, the more they learn." Yuji didn't need to be told twice. He lunged forward, his fist connecting with the nearest construct in a burst of cursed energy. The impact sent shards of gravel flying, but the creature merely reformed, its body now reinforced with jagged shards of metal from the carnival's debris. "Great," Yuji muttered, dodging a swipe from its elongated arm. "Now they're upgrading." Nobra, meanwhile, was holding her own against a swarm of smaller cursed spirits that had emerged from the carousel. Her hammer and nails flashed in the dim light as she drove them into the spirits' cores, her movements sharp and precise. But even she was beginning to show signs of strain. "These things don't stay down," she shouted, her voice tinged with frustration. "It's like they're feeding off the carnival itself." Her observation was chillingly accurate. The cursed energy in the air was growing denser, the paradoxes feeding off the trio's efforts to destroy them. Every strike, every cursed technique, only seemed to make the situation worse. It was then that Megumi noticed something unusual. The cursed constructs weren't just attacking randomly, they were herding the trio toward the Ferris wheel. "They're trying to corner us," he said, his voice low but urgent. "We need to break their pattern." Yuji nodded, his mind racing. He glanced at the Ferris wheel, its towering structure now pulsating with cursed energy. "What if we use it against them?" he suggested, a spark of determination in his eyes. Megumi frowned, considering the idea. "It's risky, but it might be our only shot." The plan was simple in theory, use the Ferris wheel's cursed energy to create a diversion, then strike at the source of the paradoxes. But executing it would require perfect timing and coordination. Yuji and Megumi exchanged a quick nod before springing into action. Yuji charged toward the Ferris wheel, his movements a blur as he dodged the construct's attacks. Megumi summoned his divine dogs, their spectral forms darting through the chaos to create openings for Yuji. Nobra, meanwhile, focused on holding off the smaller spirits, her curses keeping them at bay while the others worked. As Yuji reached the base of the Ferris wheel, he channeled his cursed energy into his fists, aiming a powerful blow at one of the support beams. The impact sent a shockwave through the structure, causing it to shudder and groan. The cursed energy within the Ferris wheel surged, the gondolas now writhing like living creatures. Yuji didn't stop. He struck again and again, each blow weakening the structure further. "Now, Megumi," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. Megumi's hands moved in a flurry of hand signs as he summoned his the massive Shikigami materializing above the Ferris wheel. With a deafening screech, Nu slammed into the structure, its talons tearing through the cursed energy-infused metal. The Ferris wheel groaned and tilted, its gondolas breaking free and crashing to the ground. The cursed constructs hesitated, their movements faltering as the source of their power was disrupted. It was the opening the trio needed. But just as they began to gain the upper hand, a new threat emerged. From the shadows of the collapsing Ferris wheel stepped a figure, their presence radiating an overwhelming aura of cursed energy. It was a humanoid cursed spirit, its form sleek and unnervingly human-like, save for the jagged cracks that ran across its skin like shattered glass. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its voice was a chilling blend of amusement and malice. "You've done well to make it this far," it said, its tone almost conversational. "But this carnival is no ordinary domain. It feeds on your fears, your doubts, your very essence. And you've given it so much to work with." Yuji's blood ran cold. The cursed spirit's words struck a nerve, echoing the doubts that had been gnawing at him since the battle began. He glanced at Megumi and Nobara, their faces reflecting the same unease. The spirit's grin widened, its cracked lips stretching unnaturally. "Let's see how long you can last," it said, before lunging forward with blinding speed. The fight that followed was unlike anything the trio had faced before. The cursed spirit moved with a fluidity that defied logic, its attacks unpredictable and devastating. Yuji's punches, though powerful, seemed to barely graze its form, while Megumi's Shikigami were swatted aside like flies. Nobara's curses, usually so effective, fizzled out before they could reach their target. It was as if the spirit was toying with them, drawing out the battle to savor their growing desperation. But even in the face of such overwhelming odds, the trio refused to give up. Yuji's determination burned brighter with each passing second, his cursed energy flaring as he pushed himself to his limits. Megumi's strategic mind worked overtime, analyzing the spirit's movements for any weakness. Nobara, though visibly shaken, fought with a ferocity that belied her fear. Together, they began to adapt, their teamwork slowly turning the tide. The turning point came when Yuji managed to land a solid hit on the spirit, his fist connecting with its chest in a burst of cursed energy. The spirit staggered, its form flickering for a brief moment. "Now," Yuji shouted, and Megumi seized the opportunity. He summoned his max elephant, the massive Shikigami crashing down on the spirit with enough force to shake the ground. Nobara followed up with a barrage of nails, each one infused with her cursed energy. The spirit let out a piercing scream, its form beginning to fracture. But before they could deliver the final blow, the spirit vanished, its laughter echoing through the carnival. "This isn't over," its voice taunted, fading into the distance. The trio stood amidst the wreckage, their breaths heavy and their bodies bruised. The immediate threat was gone, but the carnival's curse remained, its paradoxes still twisting the air around them. As they regrouped, a new realization dawned on them. The cursed spirit's words had planted a seed of doubt, and the carnival was feeding on it. Trust, already fragile, began to waver. Yuji caught Megumi glancing at him with an unreadable expression, while Nobara's usual confidence seemed shaken. The stakes had risen once again, not just in the form of the cursed spirit, but in the potential for betrayal from within. The carnival's true power lay not in its curses, but in its ability to exploit the cracks in their unity. Yuji clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. They couldn't afford to fall apart now. The battle was far from over, and the carnival's paradoxes were only growing stronger. But as long as they stood together, they had a chance. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Megumi and Nobara nodded, their expressions mirroring his determination. The fight was far from over, and the carnival's twisted games had only just begun. The carnival's neon lights flickered like dying stars, casting eerie shadows over the twisted attractions. Yuji Itadori clenched his fists, his knuckles white as he scanned the chaos around him. The cursed energy in the air was thick, suffocating, and the laughter of the cursed spirits echoed like a macabre symphony. Beside him, Megumi Fushiguro's shadows writhed, ready to strike, while Nobara Kujisaki twirled her hammer, her eyes sharp and calculating. They had fought their way through the carnival's horrors, but something felt off. The cursed spirits were too coordinated, too purposeful. It was as if they were being guided by something, or someone. Before Yuji could voice his suspicions, a figure emerged from the shadows of the Ferris wheel. Tall and lean, with a mop of unruly silver hair and a grin that bordered on manic, the newcomer stepped into the light. His eyes, One a piercing gold and the other a deep crimson, glinted with mischief. He wore a patchwork coat stitched together from what looked like cursed energy, and in his hand, he twirled a jagged dagger that seemed to hum with power. Well, 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 he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. If it isn't the famous trio of Jujutsu High. I was hoping you'd show up. Yuji's instinct screamed danger. Who the hell are you? He demanded, his stance shifting into a defensive position. Megumi's shadows coiled tighter, and Nobra's grip on her hammer tightened. The stranger chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. Name's Ryo Kurogami. Call me a wildcard, if you will. I've got a vested interest in this little carnival of yours. He tilted his head, his mismatched eyes narrowing. And I'm not here to play nice. Before anyone could react, Ryo lunged, his dagger slicing through the air with blinding speed. Yuji barely managed to dodge, the blade grazing his cheek. He countered with a punch, but Ryo twisted mid-air, landing gracefully on the carousel's roof. Not bad, Ryo taunted, but you'll have to do better than that. Nobara didn't wait for an invitation. She hurled a nail infused with cursed energy, aiming for Ryo's chest. He deflected it with a flick of his dagger, the nail embedding itself into the carousel's wooden frame. Cute, he sneered, but predictable. With a snap of his fingers, the carousel came to life, its cursed horses rearing and charging at the trio. Megumi summoned his divine dog, the shadowy creature lunging at the nearest horse. The two collided in a burst of cursed energy, the dog's fangs sinking into the horse's neck. Yuji leapt onto the carousel, his fists glowing with cursed energy as he smashed through the wooden horses. Nobara followed, her hammer swinging in wide arcs, shattering the cursed constructs with each strike. Ryo watched from above, his grin widening. You're not bad, he admitted, but let's see how you handle this. He raised his dagger, and the air around him shimmered. A wave of cursed energy erupted, forming a vortex that pulled at the trio. Yuji planted his feet, his muscles straining against the force, while Megumi's shadows anchored him to the ground. Nobara wasn't so lucky, she was lifted off her feet, her hammer slipping from her grasp. Nobara, Yuji shouted, reaching for her, but Ryo was already moving. He appeared in front of Yuji in a blur, his dagger aimed for his heart. Yuji blocked with his forearm, the blade slicing through his sleeve and drawing blood. He retaliated with a knee to Ryo's stomach, but the silver-haired man twisted away, his laughter echoing. Megumi seized the opening, his shadows surging forward to ensnare Ryo. But Ryo's dagger flashed, cutting through the shadows like they were paper. You'll have to do better than that, he taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. He lunged at Megumi, but Yuji intercepted, their fists colliding in a burst of cursed energy that sent shockwaves through the carnival. Nobara, now back on solid ground, retrieved her hammer and joined the fray. She hurled a barrage of nails, each one infused with cursed energy, forcing Ryo to retreat. He deflected most, but one grazed his shoulder, drawing a thin line of blood. His grin faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. You're starting to piss me off, he growled. The fight escalated, the trio pushing Ryo to his limits. But just as they seemed to gain the upper hand, Ryo's mismatched eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. Enough playing around, he said, his voice cold. He raised his dagger, and the ground beneath them trembled. Cracks spread like spider webs, and from the depths emerged grotesque cursed spirits, their forms twisted and malformed. Yuji's eyes widened. Where the hell did those come from? He shouted, punching through one of the spirits. Megumi summoned more Shikigami, his shadows writhing as they clashed with the new threats. Nobara cursed under her breath, her hammer swinging in wide arcs as she fought to keep the spirits at bay. Ryo stood at the center of the chaos, his grin returning. You see, he said, his voice carrying over the din, this carnival is more than just a playground. It's a paradox, a convergence of cursed energy and human despair. And I intend to harness it. His eyes locked onto Yuji's. You're in my way. Yuji's jaw tightened. We're not letting you do whatever the hell you're planning, he said, his voice firm. He charged at Ryo, their clash sending shockwaves through the carnival. The others fought to keep the cursed spirits at bay, but it was clear Ryo was the real threat. As the battle raged, Yuji couldn't shake the feeling that Ryo was holding back. There was something about him, something familiar, but he couldn't place it. And then it hit him, Ryo's cursed energy felt like Sukuna's, but twisted, corrupted. Who are you really? Yuji demanded, his fists glowing with cursed energy as he landed a blow that sent Ryo skidding back. Ryo's grin widened, his mismatched eyes gleaming with malice. Wouldn't you like to know? He said, his voice dripping with mockery. He raised his dagger, and the air around him crackled with cursed energy. But I'm afraid our little game ends here. The ground beneath them erupted in a burst of cursed energy, the force sending Yuji and the others flying. When the dust settled, Ryo was gone, leaving behind only the echoes of his laughter. The cursed spirits dissipated, the carnival falling eerily silent. Yuji pushed himself to his feet, his body aching. What the hell was that? He muttered, his mind racing. Megumi and Nobara joined him, their expressions grim. He's dangerous, Megumi said, his voice low. And he's not working alone. Nobara nodded, her grip tightening on her hammer. We need to figure out what he's after. Before it's too late. Yuji clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. Whatever it is, we'll stop him, he said, his voice steady. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Ryo Kurogami was just the beginning, and that the carnival's horrors were far from over. The air was thick with the acrid stench of cursed energy as Yuji Itadori stood amidst the chaos of the carnival, his fists clenched and his breath ragged. The twisted Ferris wheel loomed overhead, its lights flickering erratically, casting grotesque shadows that danced like malevolent spirits. Around him, the cursed spirits, grotesque amalgamations of human and carnival imagery, closed in, their laughter a cacophony of malice. Megumi and Nobara fought valiantly at his side, but the sheer number of enemies was overwhelming. Just as Yuji prepared to unleash another devastating punch, a voice cut through the din, cold and mocking. You really thought you could win, didn't you? It was Mahito, the cursed spirit who had haunted Yuji since the beginning. But something was different. His form shimmered, his usual grin replaced by a look of cruel calculation. You've been playing right into my hands this whole time, Mahito sneered, his voice dripping with venom. This carnival? It's not just a battlefield. It's a paradox, a trap designed to break you. And it's working. Yuji's heart sank as the realization hit him. The carnival wasn't just a cursed domain, it was a reflection of his own mind, a labyrinth of his fears and regrets. Every step he took, every enemy he fought, was a manifestation of his inner turmoil. Mahito had been manipulating him from the start, feeding on his doubts and insecurities. The cursed spirit's laughter echoed as he raised his hand, and the ground beneath Yuji began to shift, the carnival twisting into a nightmarish landscape. You can't win, Yuji, Mahito taunted. Because you're fighting yourself. Desperation clawed at Yuji's chest as he struggled to process the revelation. Around him, Megumi and Nobara were being overwhelmed, their movements growing sluggish as the cursed energy sapped their strength. Yuji knew he had to act fast, but his mind was a whirlwind of doubt. How could he fight an enemy that was part of him? How could he win when every victory only deepened the trap? He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as he forced himself to focus. No, he muttered, his voice low but resolute. I won't let you break me. With a surge of determination, he charged at Mahito, his cursed energy flaring like a beacon in the darkness. The two clashed in a blinding explosion of power, their fists meeting with a force that sent shockwaves rippling through the carnival. But even as Yuji fought, he could feel the weight of the paradox pressing down on him, threatening to crush his resolve. The battle was a blur of motion and desperation. Yuji's punches were fueled by raw emotion, each strike a desperate attempt to break free from the trap. But Mahito was relentless, his form shifting and twisting to evade Yuji's attacks. You're so predictable, Mahito sneered, his voice echoing in Yuji's mind. Every move you make, every thought you have, it's all part of the game. Yuji gritted his teeth, refusing to give in to the cursed spirit's taunts. He knew he had to change his approach, to think outside the box. But how? The answer came in a flash of inspiration. If the carnival was a reflection of his mind, then maybe he could use that to his advantage. Instead of fighting against the paradox, he would embrace it, turning Mahito's own trap against him. With a deep breath, Yuji closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos around him. He focused on his inner self, on the core of his being. The carnival began to shift, the twisted imagery giving way to a serene landscape. Yuji stood at the center, his mind clear and focused. Mahito's laughter faltered, his confidence wavering as he realized what Yuji was doing. What are you? He began, but Yuji cut him off with a single, decisive punch. The blow landed with a resounding crack, sending Mahito sprawling to the ground. For the first time, the cursed spirit looked genuinely shaken. You're not supposed to be able to do that, Mahito stammered, his voice trembling with fear. Yuji didn't respond. He simply stood over Mahito, his expression one of quiet determination. You're right, he said finally. This is a paradox. But it's not just mine, it's yours too. And now, you're trapped in it. With that, he unleashed a flurry of punches, each one imbued with the full force of his cursed energy. Mahito tried to fight back, but his movements were sluggish, his form unstable. The paradox was unraveling, and with it, Mahito's power. The cursed spirit let out a final, desperate scream as Yuji's fists connected, shattering his form into 1,000 shards of cursed energy. As the dust settled, Yuji stood amidst the ruins of the carnival, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. Megumi and Nobara approached, their expressions a mix of relief and awe. "You did it," Nobara said, her voice filled with admiration. But Yuji shook his head. "No," he replied. "We did it. Together." He knew the battle was far from over, that there were still countless challenges ahead. But for now, they had won. And that was enough. The carnival faded away, leaving behind only the faint echo of Mahito's laughter, a reminder of the darkness they had faced, and the strength they had found within themselves. The air was thick with the stench of cursed energy, a miasma that clung to the ruins of the carnival like a second skin. Yuji Itadori wiped the sweat from his brow, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he surveyed the battlefield. The cursed spirits had multiplied, their grotesque forms writhing and twisting in the flickering light of the broken Ferris wheel. The stakes had never been higher. The cursed paradoxes, manifestations of contradictions that defied logic, were growing stronger, feeding off the chaos they created. The team was outnumbered, outmatched, and running out of time. Megumi Fushiguro's voice cut through the tension, sharp and urgent. "We can't keep fighting like this. They're adapting to our techniques faster than we can adjust. We need a new strategy." His hands were already moving, summoning his divine dogs, their forms shimmering with cursed energy. But even they seemed hesitant, their growls low and uncertain. Nobara Kujisaki slammed her hammer into the ground, her nails spinning in her hand as she glared at the encroaching horde. "If we're going down, we're taking as many of these freaks with us as possible," she spat, her voice fierce but laced with exhaustion. Yuji clenched his fists, his mind racing. They had to find a way to turn the tide. The cursed paradoxes thrived on unpredictability, their forms shifting and reforming with every attack. But what if they could use that against them? What if we create our own paradox? He blurted out, the idea forming as he spoke. If we can trap them in a loop, maybe we can destabilize them long enough to land a decisive blow. Megumi's eyes narrowed as he considered the suggestion. It's risky, but it might work. We'd need to synchronize our attacks perfectly. One misstep, and we'll be the ones caught in the backlash. The team moved quickly, their training kicking in as they prepared for the gambit. Yuji focused on channeling his cursed energy, his fists glowing with a faint crimson light. Megumi's hands danced through the air, summoning a series of talismans to create a barrier around them. Nobara positioned herself at the center, her nails ready to strike at the heart of the paradoxes. The cursed spirits surged forward, their forms twisting into grotesque amalgamations of limbs and eyes. Yuji braced himself, his muscles coiling like springs as he launched himself into the fray. The first clash was brutal. Yuji's fists collided with a cursed spirit, its body shattering into fragments only to reform moments later. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay focused. "Now, Megumi," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. Megumi's hands slammed together, the talismans erupting in a burst of light that ensnared the spirits in a web of cursed energy. Nobara's nails shot forward, piercing through the barrier and striking the spirits with pinpoint accuracy. For a moment, it seemed like their plan was working. The paradoxes writhed in agony, their forms flickering like static on a broken screen. But then, the unexpected happened. One of the paradoxes let out a deafening screech, its body expanding rapidly before exploding in a shockwave of cursed energy. The force sent Yuji flying, his body slamming into the remnants of a carnival stall. Pain shot through his ribs, but he forced himself to his feet, his vision swimming. "They're evolving," Megumi said, his voice strained. "They're using our attacks against us." Nobara cursed under her breath, her nails spinning faster as she prepared for another strike. "We need to hit them harder. If we can't outsmart them, we'll just have to overpower them." The battlefield became a chaotic blur of motion and energy. Yuji pushed himself to the limit, his fists a blur as he unleashed a flurry of attacks. Each strike was met with resistance, the paradoxes adapting to his movements with terrifying speed. But he refused to back down. He could feel the weight of his friends' trust, their determination fueling his own. Megumi's shadows twisted and writhed, forming a protective barrier around them while simultaneously striking at the spirits. Nobara's nails flew through the air, each one finding its mark with deadly precision. Yet, despite their efforts, the paradoxes continued to multiply, their numbers overwhelming. As the fight dragged on, Yuji noticed something strange. The paradoxes seemed to be drawn to a specific area of the carnival, their movements becoming more erratic as they converged on a crumbling carousel. "There's something there," he said, his voice hoarse. "Something they're trying to protect." Megumi's eyes widened as he followed Yuji's gaze. Or something they're afraid of, he added. Nobara smirked, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Then let's go ruin their day. The trio fought their way through the horde, their movements growing more desperate as the paradoxes closed in. The carousel loomed ahead, its once bright lights now flickering weakly. As they approached, the air grew heavier, the cursed energy so dense it was almost suffocating. Yuji's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped onto the platform, his senses on high alert. The carousel began to spin, its eerie music echoing through the ruins. And then, it appeared, a massive, pulsating core of cursed energy, its form shifting and twisting like a living thing. This is it, Megumi said, his voice barely above a whisper. The source of the paradoxes. Nobara's grip tightened on her hammer. Then let's destroy it. But before they could act, the core lashed out, tendrils of cursed energy shooting toward them. Yuji barely managed to dodge, his body moving on instinct. The tendrils struck the ground, leaving deep gouges in the earth. We need to hit it with everything we've got, he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. No holding back. The final assault was a symphony of chaos and determination. Yuji channeled every ounce of his strength, his fists glowing with an intense light as he struck the core with everything he had. Megumi's shadows converged, forming a massive blade that sliced through the tendrils with surgical precision. Nobara's nails flew through the air, each one striking the core with unerring accuracy. The core writhed in agony, its form flickering as the paradoxes around them began to dissolve. But the victory came at a cost. As the core shattered, a shockwave of cursed energy erupted, sending the trio flying. Yuji hit the ground hard, his vision blurring as he struggled to stay conscious. He could hear Megumi and Nobara calling his name, their voices distant and muffled. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the crumbling remains of the Carnival, the cursed paradoxes finally defeated. When Yuji awoke, the first thing he noticed was the silence. The oppressive weight of the cursed energy was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. He sat up slowly, his body aching from the battle. Megumi and Nobara were nearby, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion. We did it, Nobara said, her voice tinged with disbelief. We actually did it. Megumi nodded, his usual stoicism softened by a faint smile. But this isn't over. There's still so much we don't understand about these paradoxes. Yuji stood, his legs shaky but steady. Then we'll figure it out, he said, his voice firm. Together. The trio shared a look, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, but the battle had only just begun. The carnival of cursed paradoxes was gone, but the shadows it cast lingered, a reminder of the challenges yet to come. And as they walked away from the ruins, their resolve unwavering, they knew one thing for certain: they were ready for whatever came next. The air crackled with cursed energy as Yuji Itadori stood amidst the chaos of the carnival, his fists clenched and his breathing ragged. The cursed spirits around him twisted and writhed, their grotesque forms illuminated by the flickering neon lights of the cursed domain. This was no ordinary battle, this was a clash of wills, a fight against the paradoxical nature of the curses themselves. The stakes had never been higher, and Yuji knew that failure meant not just his death, but the unraveling of reality itself. Across from him, the cursed spirit known as the Paradox Jester loomed, its form shifting between humanoid and monstrous, its laughter echoing like a broken record. You can't win, Yuji Itadori, it sneered, its voice a cacophony of contradictions. Every move you make only strengthens me. Your strength is my strength. Your pain is my joy. You are trapped in a loop of your own making. Yuji gritted his teeth, his cursed energy flaring as he charged forward, his movements a blur of speed and precision. He feinted left, then pivoted right, his fist slamming into the jester's side with a thunderous impact. The spirit staggered but quickly recovered, its form distorting as it absorbed the energy of Yuji's strike. Before Yuji could follow up, a shadow darted from the side, Megumi Fushiguro, his face set in a determined scowl. Don't let it bait you, Yuji, he shouted, summoning his divine dogs. The twin wolves lunged at the jester, their jaws snapping with cursed energy. The jester laughed, its form splitting into two identical copies, each dodging the attacks with unnatural grace. Clever, but not clever enough. It taunted. Megumi's eyes narrowed as he formed a hand sign, and the ground beneath the jester erupted with tendrils of shadow. The spirit hissed, its copies merging back into one as it struggled against the binding technique. Yuji seized the opportunity, channeling cursed energy into his fists. Divergent fist, he roared, unleashing a barrage of punches that struck the jester from multiple angles. Each hit sent shockwaves through the air, the spirit's form flickering like a glitching hologram. But just as Yuji thought he had the upper hand, the jester's laughter grew louder, and its body began to swell with power. "You still don't understand, do you?" it mocked. "Your attacks only make me stronger." Yuji's eyes widened as the jester's energy surged, its form expanding into a towering monstrosity. Nobara Kujisaki joined the fray, her hammer and nails at the ready. "Enough of this nonsense," she shouted, driving a nail into a straw doll she had prepared. The jester roared as its body was pierced by an invisible force, but it quickly retaliated, sending a wave of cursed energy toward Nobara. She dodged, her movements sharp and calculated, but the sheer force of the attack sent her skidding backward. "This thing's no joke," she muttered, wiping blood from her lip. "We need a new plan, and fast." The trio regrouped, their breathing heavy but their resolve unshaken. "We can't keep hitting it head on," Megumi said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Its power grows with every attack. We need to outthink it." Yuji nodded, his mind racing. "What if we hit it with something it can't absorb? Something that disrupts its paradoxical nature?" Nobara smirked, her eyes gleaming with determination. "I like the sound of that. Let's give it a taste of its own medicine." As the jester advanced, its form towering over them like a living nightmare, the three sorcerers moved in perfect sync. Megumi summoned his new, the massive Shikigami, diving at the jester with lightning speed. The spirit swatted it aside, but the distraction gave Yuji and Nobara the opening they needed. Yuji focused his cursed energy, channeling it into a single, concentrated point. "Black flash," he shouted, his fist connecting with the jester's chest in a burst of blinding light. The impact was unlike anything he had ever delivered, the sheer force of the attack rippling through the spirit's form. But the jester wasn't done yet. It lashed out with a tendril of cursed energy, forcing Yuji to leap back. Nobara, however, was already in motion. She hurled a nail at the jester, embedding it in its distorted body. "Resonance," she cried, and the jester's form shuddered as the technique took hold. For a moment, it seemed as though the spirit might falter, but then it laughed again, its voice dripping with malice. "You think you can break me? I am the embodiment of paradox. I am eternal." Megumi stepped forward, his expression grim. "Then we'll just have to rewrite the rules," he said, his hands moving in a complex series of gestures. The shadows around him writhed and surged, forming a massive, intricate seal. Domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. The carnival was engulfed in darkness, the jester's form flickering as it struggled against the overwhelming power of Megumi's domain. Yuji and Nobara didn't waste a second, they charged forward, their attacks synchronized with the shifting shadows. Yuji's fists moved like lightning, each strike landing with pinpoint accuracy. Nobara's nails flew like bullets, each one finding its mark. The jester roared, its form beginning to fracture under the relentless assault. This can't be." It screamed, its voice filled with rage and disbelief. "I am infinite. I am unstoppable." But its words rang hollow as its body began to dissolve, the cursed energy that had sustained it unraveling. As the jester's form disintegrated, the carnival around them began to collapse, the cursed domain breaking apart. Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara stood together, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. "We did it," Yuji said, his voice filled with relief. "We actually did it." Megumi nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "We make a pretty good team," he admitted. Nobara laughed, though it was more of a pained chuckle. "Don't get used to it," she said. "Next time, I'm taking the lead." The three of them turned as the last remnants of the cursed domain faded, the real world coming back into focus. The battle was over, but the scars it had left, both physical and emotional, would remain. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, but they knew that the fight against cursed spirits was far from over. As they walked away from the ruins of the carnival, the weight of their victory settled on their shoulders, a reminder of the sacrifices they had made and the battles yet to come. The air crackled with cursed energy, a chaotic storm of black and red lightning tearing through the carnival's twisted landscape. Yuji Itadori stood at the center of it all, his body battered, his breath ragged, but his eyes burning with unyielding determination. Across from him, the cursed paradox, a grotesque fusion of human and carnival monstrosity, loomed, its laughter echoing like a deranged symphony. This was the final battle, the defining moment where everything would be decided, and Yuji knew there was no room for hesitation. The cursed paradox lunged, its massive clawed hand slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Yuji barely dodged, the force of the swing sending him skidding across the ground. His muscles screamed in protest, every fiber of his being pushed to its limit. He could feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him, but he refused to falter. Behind him, Megumi and Nobara were locked in their own struggles, their cursed techniques flaring as they fought to hold back the Paradox's minions. The Carnival was a battlefield, a nightmarish arena where every second counted. Yuji clenched his fists, his cursed energy flaring as he channeled every ounce of strength he had left. He dashed forward, his movements a blur as he closed the distance between himself and the Paradox. His fist collided with its grotesque face, the impact sending shockwaves through the air. The creature staggered, but it wasn't enough. It retaliated with a barrage of cursed energy blasts, forcing Yuji to leap and weave through the onslaught. Each near miss left him more drained, but he pushed through, his mind focused on one goal: ending this nightmare. Megumi's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent. Yuji, now. Yuji didn't need to be told twice. He leapt back, creating space as Megumi summoned his divine dogs. The Shikigami surged forward, their jaws clamping down on the Paradox's limbs, holding it in place. Nobara followed up, her resonance technique amplifying the damage as she drove nails into the creature's body. The Paradox roared in agony, its form writhing as it struggled to break free. But it wasn't enough. The Paradox's cursed energy surged, shattering the divine dogs and sending Megumi and Nobara flying. Yuji's heart clenched as he watched his friends hit the ground, their bodies limp. He was alone now, facing the Paradox with nothing but his fists and his will. The creature turned its gaze on him, its eyes filled with malice and mockery. "You're nothing," it sneered, its voice a distorted cacophony. "Just a pawn in a game you can't win." Yuji's fists tightened. "Maybe," he said, his voice steady despite the pain coursing through him. "But I'm not giving up. Not now. Not ever." He charged forward, his cursed energy flaring brighter than ever before. The Paradox met him head-on, their clash shaking the very fabric of the Carnival. Each blow Yuji landed felt like a victory, but the Paradox's resilience was staggering. It seemed to grow stronger with every hit, its cursed energy surging to new heights. As the battle raged on, Yuji's mind began to drift. He thought of his friends, of the people he'd lost, of the lives that hung in the balance. He thought of Sukuna, the king of curses, whose presence still lingered within him like a shadow. He thought of the choices he'd made, the sacrifices he'd endured, and the future he was fighting for. And then, in a moment of clarity, he realized what he had to do. With a roar, Yuji unleashed everything he had, his cursed energy surging to its absolute limit. The Paradox hesitated, its confidence faltering for the first time. Yuji's fists became a blur, each strike landing with precision and power. He could feel the Paradox's cursed energy weakening, its form beginning to fracture. But it wasn't just his strength that was breaking through, it was his resolve, his unwavering belief in the path he'd chosen. The final blow came in a burst of light and energy, Yuji's fist driving through the Paradox's core. The creature let out a deafening scream, its form disintegrating into nothingness. The Carnival began to collapse around them, the cursed energy dissipating as the Paradox's influence faded. Yuji fell to his knees, his body spent, but his heart filled with a quiet sense of triumph. As the dust settled, Megumi and Nobara stirred, their injuries severe but not fatal. They crawled over to Yuji, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion. "You did it," Megumi said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yuji managed a weak smile. "We did it," he corrected. Nobara chuckled, though it was more of a pained gasp. "Don't get all humble on us now," she said. "You're the one who landed the final hit." The aftermath was a somber reflection of the battle they'd just endured. The Carnival was gone, replaced by a quiet, empty field. The cursed energy that had once saturated the area was now a faint echo, a reminder of what they'd overcome. But the victory came with a cost. The Paradox's defeat had reshaped the universe in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. The balance of cursed energy had shifted, and the future was now uncertain. As they made their way back, Yuji couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The battle had changed him, deepened his understanding of the world and his place in it. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, but he was ready. He had faced the impossible and emerged stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. The sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the horizon. Yuji looked at his friends, their faces etched with the same determination he felt. They had been pushed to their limits, but they had broken through, and in doing so, they had reshaped not just their own futures, but the fate of the universe itself. And as they walked into the light of a new day, Yuji knew that whatever came next, they would face it together.